to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellis, and the president of 1615 Church Missions Coaching. Before we get started today, I want to let you know about some upcoming events that 1615 has put together. We'll be having another webinar on September 11th, 2014, and the title is How Should We Define Missions? Our presenter is Denny Spitters of Pioneers, and he's going to be talking about the importance of clarifying the definition of missions and the implications of that. Hope that's a topic you'll join us for. And then we have another webinar on October 22nd of this year. It will be put on by Rick Davis of Engage Global, and the concept we'll be discussing is international missions experience without crossing international borders. As you know, God has brought many internationals to the United States, and this presents an opportunity for the church to be involved in world missions without even leaving our country. So a great opportunity to learn how you can mobilize your people, churches, youth, college students, really anyone to be a part of reaching the internationals that God has brought to the United States. And then we're also having a Reduce conference in Nashville, Tennessee on December 2nd of this year. It's a one-day conference. It's free. We did one earlier this year in New Mexico, and God brought a lot of fruit, so we're repeating it again. The idea of this conference is that we need to be reduced in order to be part of finishing the task God has given us. So the tagline is, the enormity of the unfinished task demands less of us. So if you want to get online and learn more about that event, please log on to 1615.org/events, and you'll find out how to register. Again, a free conference, so if you're in the area or you have friends or you know people in the area, you might want to recommend that they attend. So today's topic is community to community, empowering churches and alleviating worldwide spiritual and physical hunger one community at a time. Community to community is a ministry approach that connects churches with communities in developing countries. By building and investing in these relationships, churches can respond in a holistic manner to the issues of poverty in those countries, while also providing a unique opportunity inside the North American church to understand the root causes of poverty in all its manifestations. We hope this webinar provides ideas on how to more effectively respond to the issues of poverty in your very own community, while showing you how you can engage the entire church in different capacities to transform communities in developing countries. Today's subject matter experts are Juan Pablo Belmonte and Marvin Proctor. Juan Pablo is a church engagement representative at Food for the Hungry, and Marvin Proctor is the president at Improve Group, a business in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he serves as a volunteer with Food for the Hungry and has worked many years with Juan Pablo in Bolivia. In just a moment, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Juan Pablo and Marvin, but first, just a couple of details. Your phones are muted to preserve sound quality, and on that note of sound quality, we hope that we have good quality on this call, but I need to let you know that Juan Pablo is in La Paz, Bolivia, actually where the church-to-community connection is, and so hopefully that connection stays strong, the audio connection, that is. And you can also listen to your computer speakers, or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind today, please type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be addressing those questions for the last 15 or 20 minutes of our time together. 36 people have registered for today's live webinar. I want to let you know that this webinar is also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org in the next couple of weeks. Juan Pablo and Marvin, I want to hand the webinar over to you today. Thank you so much for being a part. Juan, why don't you take it from here?
Great, thank you so much, Matt. Hello, thanks for joining us today. In this webinar, my name is Juan Pablo Belmonte. I work for Food for the Hungry as a church representative for Latin American countries mainly, and my role is to build bridges between churches in the United States and communities in these countries. I have worked with Food for the Hungry for about 7 years so far, and I have to say that it has been a life-changing experience for me. In Food for the Hungry, we try to understand the complex dynamics of poverty and how to biblically offer solutions in order to be closer to God's heart for the poor. Let me first start by just telling you a little bit about our vision and our mission statements, which of course reflect our God-given call. Our mission is God called, and we're responding until physical and spiritual hungers ended worldwide. Again, we are sure God wants us, His people, to have a heart for the poor. Our mission statement is to walk with churches, leaders, and families in overcoming all forms of human poverty by living in a healthy relationship with God and His creation. We will see later on during this webinar what this mission means for us on a daily basis. It is crucial for us and just for any other Christian believer to understand the issue of poverty. So let us start with a huge question. And the question I want to throw is, what is poverty? Again, this is a huge question, and I have heard many answers to it, and even believe many of them were right. However, over the years, I have seen that none of those responses were right or complete. Most of them only explain poverty as the lack of or bad distribution of resources. And this kind of thinking does not work when we talk about solutions for poverty and development. In order to have that biblical understanding of poverty, we're going to look at how it was creation. And we can see that in creation, there were 4 key relationships that were established. So the first relationship was man with God. The second relationship, man with others. Man with himself. The third relationship, man with others. And the fourth relationship was man with God's creation. We can say that from the beginning, our relational God gave us His nature and made us relational people. And He concluded this great creation by saying creation is good. Now let's take a look at what happened after the fall with these 4 key relationships. At this specific time, we can realize that these 4 key relationships were broken because of fall. And poverty came into the world. And it started to manifest in different types of poverty that we now see around the world, like personal, spiritual, social, physical. Each one of these relationships and what happened to them is described in the book of Genesis. Then the need that we had to understand poverty from a biblical worldview. We can respond to the question again of what is poverty by saying that poverty is a result of relationships that do not work, that are broken. And this is something that Brian Mayers in his book, Walking with the Poor, stated. This is a statement I had never heard before arriving. Most of the time we tend to only notice physical poverty. What is visible is easier to be noticed and seen. When I first visited developing communities in my own country here in Bolivia, I noticed that children were malnourished. And I thought that they just needed better food to overcome this issue. However, I was just seeing one of the several manifestations that a broken relationship of men with others caused, since they did not think that caring for the children was a priority. I also thought that the lack of a health center was another big or important cause of bad health in children. But just by building and equipping a new health center facility did not improve the health conditions. Let me finally illustrate this to you with another example. We had a meeting with other different organizations here in Bolivia, including some Christian organizations, governments, offices, and they asked, how did you decrease chronic malnutrition in this region from 59% to 18%? They said something very interesting. They said, we are using the same methodology as you, the same strategy, but we didn't get the same results. Then they figured out that, yes, they were using the same strategies, methodologies, and activities such as diversifying the diet, teaching new agriculture techniques, hand washing, and many others. But what we were doing differently is that we were mainly working in the root causes of that problem. We were working, teaching parents that they were created to God's image, that their children were created to God's image, and therefore their lives were very valuable. In consequence, they had to take good care of them. This is what really made the difference. Projects do not last forever, but ideas can definitely impact generations. Now, there's another huge question for us, and that big question is, who are the poor? At the beginning, or our first answer to these questions will likely be, they are. You know, the children in the orphanage are the poor, people in the street are, homeless people are, or people in that X or Y community or country are the poor. But as we start to understand these complex dynamics of poverty, and that as we start to understand that this is a relational problem, then we start answering this differently. And we may answer, we are the poor, because we may also find areas of our life that need to be reconciled, relationships that are broken that need to be reconciled. Finally, when this becomes a revelation of our own acts, thoughts, and worldview, then we may answer, I am poor, as it happened to me. And let me just tell a shorter story of how I ended up convinced to answer, I am poor. I grew up in a wealthy Bolivian family. However, my father always taught me to care for the poor. And when I got food for the hungry, I thought, could there be a better way to serve the poor? One night I was visiting a rural community and I heard Christian Quechua worship in a little house. The family in that house invited me over to worship with them. They sang worships in Quechua, saying, thanks God, thanks God, thanks God. Inside my mind and heart, I started to question God, and I asked him, why are they thanking you for, God? Are they thanking you for the long hours their children have to walk to get to school? Are they thanking you for the malnutrition? Are they thanking you for the lack of clean water? Or for the one-bedroom house they have? Or just for the dirt floor they have as a bedroom? I was really mad with God, and I was struggling inside myself while I was listening to those Quechua songs that were worshiping God. And I concluded, how did you forget these people, God? Then I believe that God has started to speak to me. if I can say that he ever spoke to me, I believe that was the only time that he did this in a very clear manner. And what he said is he placed this picture of my family in my mind and in my heart and in my soul. And I saw my family in that house. They were doing what this family does on a daily basis. My wife was getting water from a river for the daily needs. My children were walking for hours to get to school and to shepherd the sheep out in the mountains. Then I heard God telling me, they are thanking me because they have me. And then he asked me, if this would be real, will you still worship me, Juan Pablo? That was a very hard question to me. And I have to be honest, even today, and say that I still have trouble to answer that question in a honest way. But that family worshiped God for hours in spite of their hard circumstances. God taught me through this family that I was poor too. Actually, I was even poorer than they were. Now, it is not enough to just identify ourselves as poor people. We need to intentionally play the role that God has inspired us to play in His great plan. And we can find a glance of what this plan means in the book of Colossians, chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. For God, in all His fullness, was pleased to live in Christ, and by Him God reconciled everything to Himself. We made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of His blood on the cross. Now it is up to us to accept God's invitation to start reconciling these broken relationships and help others do the same, and through these be a part of His great redemption plan. He already did everything by sending His only Son to die for us on the cross, but He wants us to realize how by accepting this invitation we ourselves will overcome our own poverty as we help others do the same. Let me now just try to explain you how what I've talked about so far, what I've talked to you about so far. Let me try to explain you how does that look on a daily basis. Our model is called child-focused transformation. We are focused on children because they are the most vulnerable. But at the same time, we believe that they have great God-given potential. And in order to impact children's life, we need to impact their whole environment. We cannot just work with children. We need to work closely with the family, with the church, with the whole community, with the leaders, with the teachers, with the schools. Therefore, our works need to be intentionally carried out in order to bring biblical principles and the right concept of reconciling broken relationships to all these actors in a community. We work with four main sectors for community transformation. We work with education, with health and nutrition, with livelihoods, with disaster risk reduction. And these four sectors are strategically designed in order to carry out not only projects, but all those principles I talked to you about. We also recognize God's work from beginning to end. Before we start working in a community, we already have a strategy in mind. We have a sustainability plan in order to leave that community, because we recognize that we're not bringing God there. God was there long ago before we arrive there. Now, when communities have embraced the main biblical principles to overcome poverty, we are ready to live. Again, projects don't last forever, but ideas and the biblical worldview can impact generations. And once communities understand the right concept of poverty and how reconciling relationships, broken relationships will definitely contribute to the process of overcoming poverty, we're ready to live. Because it's not food for the hungry community, it is their community. And they are the ones that we need to empower in order to still overcome the future issues they'll have. If they have embraced these main ideas, then they'll be ready to overcome whatever comes in the future. Now I will introduce Marvin Proctor. He's been a great volunteer for our work in Bolivia. I know personally Marvin for about 8 years, and his experience with Food for the Hungry and a small community in the surrounding areas of Sucre, Bolivia. So Marvin, I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Juan Pablo. Well, as Juan Pablo said, I've had some affiliation with Food for the Hungry here through the church I attend, which is Mountain Christian Church, outside Albuquerque. We're about 20 minutes outside Albuquerque, and it's the smallest church, 200 people for worship on Sundays. And we became a community-to-community church partner with a community in Bolivia back in 2009. Our church has always been pretty missions focused. Over 25% of the budget has been dedicated to missions since I began attending there in the 80s. And we really weren't prepared for the transformation, though, that this community-to-community relationship would have on us as a church. We had been looking, I'm also one of the youth leaders at our church, and we had been looking for a place to send our students on mission trips overseas where we could have the greatest impact on them personally. Part of our strategy for our youth ministry was that we wanted every student to have an overseas mission experience before they graduated from high school. And so God brought Food for the Hungry along just at that time when we were sort of on this search. One of Food for the Hungry's mantras in the community-to-community relationship is they want to see end-to-end transformation. Transformation in the community, but also transformation with the church connected to that community. That's been our experience. We expected this to be a different kind of mission experience than we'd had before. We really weren't prepared for how God was going to use this, in some of us personally and in our church as well. We've made about a dozen trips with folks from our church to Sucre, Bolivia, since 2009, always to the same community. And so we've established deep relationships with the people in the community. We've had students go back multiple times and just seen an incredible impact on our students as well as our church. Our first trip was kind of funny. When you go, Food for the Hungry says, you know, this trip is not about the project. Well, we didn't really get that. I mean, I've been taking kids on mission trips since the 70s, and you know, we always sort of took the guerrilla warfare approach where you ride into town, you do your project for a week or 10 days, and then you ride out of town and you never see them again. Well, when you go on a community-to-community trip, Food for the Hungry is very intentional about making sure that you're constantly connecting with members of the community and not just building structures. And in fact, we were a little frustrated that we didn't get to dig more ditches. But after 3 or 4 days, we began to understand this whole concept of the 4 broken relationships and how the real solution to the problem is restoration of those relationships. And we began to see that God could use us to help repair and restore these relationships. And as that became our focus, we began to recognize, as Juan Pablo said, our own poverty and our own need for that restoration. And so it became a real partnership between the members of Mountain Christian Church and the residents of this small community outside Sucre called Horno Casa. And what we've discovered is that this type of community-to-community relationship has a profound educational impact on those who go. As you begin to understand what the true causes of poverty are, what the true definitions of poverty are, and you begin to see God's plan for meeting those needs, it changes the way you view your own community. And we've seen it change the way we do ministry in Cedar Crest, the community that we live in. An example is, for a long time, we've had a wood ministry at our church where people from the church and the community go and cut wood, and then in the winter when it's cold and needy people need heat, we'll provide wood for them. And it's a great ministry, and it's met a lot of needs. There was a missing component, though. And it was this relational component. And after some of us had been in the field of Food for the Hungry, we recognized we had an opportunity to assign someone to be responsible. And so one of the transformational aspects of this for us has been to really change the way we see missions, change the way we see our own work to bring God's kingdom to whatever piece of real estate he's put us in. I think the other benefit for us as a church has just been the number of people in our church who are connected to this work. We have about close to 100 children that we sponsor, individuals sponsor in our church who live in that community. We've probably taken 60 different people to the community. So you've got 2/3 to 3/4 of the people who attend our church are directly connected and invested in this one relationship and this one work. And so it's created an energy and some unity around that that's been very effective for us. The photo on the screen is of a young lady named Sabasta, who my wife and I have sponsored. We've sponsored kids for years through other organizations, and it's far and away the most effective way to attack poverty. What I did not understand, though, was the power of going and meeting your sponsored child and having a relationship with your sponsored child, and that's had a greater impact on Sebastian's life than the $35 a month that we send. And so there's just a couple of examples of how really profound this community-to-community concept is. And I don't know that Food for the Hungry really realizes how deep the impact is on the churches that they work with. And so it's been a great thing for us. The work in that community is ending. We're starting a new community just next door with Food for the Hungry, and Lord willing, this will just last forever for us. So, Juan Pablo, I'll let you continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara, for sharing those great thoughts with us. Great. So, how is our work with the Global Church, the community-to-community partnerships? As Marvin said, we really want to give a different experience, because we believe that walking with churches does not only mean walking with the church in this specific community in this developing country, but it's also walking with the global church, whether it's in the United States or Canada or just any other part of the world. We believe that as a church body, we are called to walk together in order to start this journey of mutual transformation that Marvin described. And your church is invited to partner with Food for the Hungry and start this journey to help the poor. Once again, after some experience with Food for Hungry, you'll learn that they were not the only poor. They were not the only poor people. And we as Food for the Hungry staff, we grow so much as well when we have churches that come and see our work and support our work, because they really encourage our staff. As you may imagine, it's really hard to work in this type of communities where you see many issues on a daily basis. And it's very frustrating not seeing the fruits for the next day, because this really requires a long period of time. So when we have churches coming alongside us and encouraging our staff and telling them, yes, I do know this difference, then that's a great fuel that can uniquely infuse different dynamics and a fresh dynamic into the daily work that we do. So the way what we want to provide for your churches is unify your church around that, because it's really close to its heart. Also develop, have the opportunity to play that role of reconciliation, of restoration of relationships, and transform the mutual transformation journey that Marvin talked about. What are the steps to get started with this? You can select a country. That's the first step. I'm going to show you later on what are the countries we're working on. The second one is to begin a conversation with a church representative and build your custom partnership. We really want this to be a walking together process, a walking together journey. We want to walk with you. And the third step is to share child sponsorship with your congregation. Marvin mentioned that this is a powerful thing, sponsoring children, and it really is, not only for that specific child, for the family that is behind it and the whole community, but also for the sponsors, because it really connects them on a different relational dynamic. And the fourth step is to develop a relationship with your partner community. This is by sponsoring more children and taking short-term teams and writing letters and sharing about the real concept of poverty within your own community. The countries we are currently working in Latin America are Guatemala, Nicaragua, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Peru, Bolivia. In Africa, we're working in Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Mozambique. In Asia, we're working in Bangladesh, Cambodia, the Philippines, and Indonesia. I pray that these thoughts that I share with you today and that Marvin shared with you today would really give you a glimpse of how this is working and how this is really impacting and transforming people around the world, not only in our countries, in developing countries, but also in communities like yours. It's really giving people the right perspective about what poverty really is and how we can vividly offer solutions and how those solutions are just relational things that we need to restore in our lives. Thank you so much, Matt, for the time and the support, and it's been a privilege for me to share today. Thanks, Marv, as well. And if you want to learn more about our program, Food for the Hungry, feel free to contact me. You'll find my contact information there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juan Pablo. What I'd like to do now is open it up for some question and answer time. Again, the So if you would like to address Marvin or Juan Pablo, if you have more specific questions about church to community or just questions about poverty or anything, now would be the time to ask those questions, and I'll field those. As I'm waiting for some of those questions to materialize, let me just stick this out there, Marvin, Juan, and again, not to compare FH to any other child sponsorship ministry, because there's a lot of ministries doing a lot of good out there. But one of the things that strikes me as pretty distinct about FH is the C2C model, where a local congregation, local as in local church, actually engages deeply in a specific community, in the developing world in an impoverished place. So I wonder, some of this was in the presentation, but maybe you could talk a little bit about what makes the C2C different than, what I would call a pretty typical child sponsorship approach. And again, not to minimize any of the work being done out there, but what differentiates it from a typical child sponsorship approach?
Well,
okay, I'll say.
This is Marvin.
Oh,
go ahead, Juan Pablo. Go ahead. I can say from a, from a user point of view, I mean, you can, my experience with other organizations was really just more out of my own ignorance of thinking that sending the check was the most important part of the transaction. And in a C2C relationship, a component of that relationship is Food for the Hungry's intentionality about connecting you, if possible, face-to-face with your sponsored child. If you're able to travel with one of the groups from your church, you get to meet your child in their home with their family. And Food for the Hungry is very intentional about preparing you for that and preparing the child, and then to have more meaningful correspondence with them through letters between trips because you've met. And the thing I've observed with Food for the Hungry in the field, again, I've not observed this with other organizations because I haven't gone to the field with them, but with Food for the Hungry, the sponsorship program is sort of the key entree that those families and those children have to the transformational work that Food for the Hungry is doing in that community. So they're assigned staff in the field, and they're given access to programs in the field that help heal these broken relationships and solve those core issues of poverty.
Yeah, there's a dictum that 1615 uses a lot in our ministry, but it goes like this: tell me and I will forget, show me and I will remember, involve me and I will understand. And again, I think it's one of the things that I really appreciate about FH. They really seek to connect the local church, the sponsoring families, to the community in field in a way that is meaningful and deep, and I think that's when you see that transformation piece happen that you've mentioned several times, Marvin. The mutual transformation that you're the ones that are getting impacted and changed. And I'm not saying that can't happen just by sponsoring a child with a picture on the fridge, but I think it's a whole new level when it's face-to-face, life on life. And I would add that this complicates things for FH. Any ministry that's going to take this type of approach, a very personalized, hands-on, it adds new layers of complexity. But I think in the end, the relationships is really what is key. I have a question here from Mark Mason. Either of you can answer it. What is the best way to send funds to a sponsored child? And then it says through FH or Compassion International or directly. Money orders, checks. Interesting question. So what's the best way to get money to your sponsored child? Directly, money orders, checks, or through the sponsoring, Compassion or FH type ministry?
Yeah, well, definitely the best way to send funds for sponsorship is by sponsoring a child.
So through the organization, right?
Through the organization, correct. We got systems in place, and we want to facilitate that relational thing. So we love, it's great to have resources, but mainly we want to facilitate that deep relational piece.
Right, right. Marvin, you want to speak to that at all? I mean, there's a dangerous side to this question, you know, and I think that's probably what the person asking was getting at. Do you want to address that at all?
Sure. You know, there's the concern always that if you're sending money to a sponsoring organization, how much money actually goes to the child or to the program that is supporting for that child. And you know, we always have a concern that, you know, they're going to use 50% of it for administrative use costs, and not much will filter to the child. And I really don't have statistics on what any organization's ratios are. The other danger of finding a way to get it directly to the child is it going to be used in ways that really meet the core needs? Will it really get to the child just because you figure out a way to get it into their home? Will they ever get it? There's always one of the things we fight as teams when we go is we want to come with armloads of gifts and presents and money for our sponsored child because we love them. We've seen where they live. We know how many needs they have. Our very first trip, we wanted to buy shoes for every barefoot child we saw, and Food for the Hungry wouldn't let us do it, and we didn't really understand why at first. But then we realized that when we just come in and throw resources at a problem, it creates what's known as the God complex, where we feel like we're the savior who's come in to fix the problem. And we continue to mar the identity of the poor by reinforcing this idea that they don't have any assets or resources themselves. Mm. And so when you send the help through a responsible organization that knows how to identify the assets that community already has and use the resources to help that community facilitate solving the problem, then you address the core problem. And it's that shame and that marred identity that we often have.
You know, Marvin, I was thinking too, you know, having traveled overseas for the last 20 years in many, many countries, I know very much the tendency to just want to address the needs and respond to the requests for resources and those things. There's another side to this too. When you begin giving directly to a child or a child's family outside of FH or whatever organization, you can actually create a rift in the community because you know, those people are then receiving special treatment, and it sets them apart from even those in you know, their immediate environment. So sometimes I've seen resources being given into a community, and it actually, again, without accountability, without addressing the core issues, and it creates some infighting in the community. So I think there obviously are times where it could be appropriate, but I think the rule of thumb would be to talk to the organization directly to make sure that it's in keeping with the ministry approach and model. Another question here, this is a good one as well. This comes from Wendy. I'm curious to hear about the exit strategy of Food for the Hungry and how it's impacted Marvin's church. He mentioned his church is in the process of completing the work in one community and beginning work in another community. Is it difficult to say goodbye to the first community? What changes does he see in the community from the time they started until now? So kind of a couple layers there, Marvin. What's it like leaving the community? Is that tough? And then what are the changes you've seen?
Well, as sort of the liaison with Food for the Hungry in the church I attend, my hardest selling job is telling people in our church that we're going to exit that community and that they'll give up their child sponsorship and they can now sponsor a child in a new community because we have made this real connection. So we haven't actually had the going away party. It won't be for another year. We're sort of working in both communities right now, but we're gearing up, you know, for having to say goodbye. But we recognize, and it's because what we've learned through FH, how important it is to have an end date so that the community can take over. it's been an incredible experience. Our last trip in March, we spent time in the old community and part of our time in the new community. And what we had forgotten was what the current community looked like when we first got there in 2009, because it's so much cleaner. There are more kids at school. There are more intact families. There are more dads involved with families and more dads involved in church than we saw in the beginning. And we started to spend some time in the new community. We saw that those things aren't there yet. And so one of the other incredible things for us is to get to see how God has worked. And it's really built our faith in his capacity to bring transformation. And so the thing about relational ministry, it's painful, because it's going to be painful to not be as involved with Hornokasa as we have been. And we get to form new relationships with new people, but it's God's way to do it through relationships.
Yeah, I love that. To use an illustration from a movie, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but The Blind Side, if you recall, the mother that adopted the big left tackle was meeting with her snooty friends at lunch, and she was talking about this boy in her home and how she was, reaching out to him. And one of the ladies at the table said, boy, you're changing this kid's life. And she shook her head and she said, no, he's changing mine. And that's, of course, biblical. It's better to give than it is to receive. There's a benefit that comes to the giver. Again, I just want to reinforce, I love the mutual transformation component that C2C offers to a church. It's beyond child sponsorship. It really is life on life. And as you've mentioned, Marvin and Juan, transformation happens in the context of relationship, our relationship to God and our relationship to one another. And that's what the C2C really does bring. So another question here, what is the best way to choose which area of the world that you're going to focus on to start a C2C? So what's the best way to pick the area that you're going to start a C2C in?
Pick Bolivia.
All right, Bolivia it is. Juan, any ideas on how to pick a community? We may have lost Juan Pablo.
No, I'm right here. I'm just trying to think of a good answer for this question. I think well, the first thing is absolutely pray. It's going to be a decision that, again, it's long term. Most of our church partners are with us for 5, 6, 10 years. Some others, like Marvin's church, will move with a second relationship with a different community. So it's a long-term thing. So consider that, prayerfully. Pray for that. And I believe that's my answer. I don't know if you, Marv, have any other thought about that. How is that for Mountain Christian when you pick that Bolivia?
I think we felt like it was a place we could get to a little more easier than if we were going to Africa or something like that. We have Spanish speakers in our church, and so we felt like we could communicate effectively there. And we did approach it with prayer, and it just seemed to be the place that God was giving us passion about and a comfort level with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I think maybe if I could speak to that as well, 1615, one of the things we do when we're coaching a church and they're trying to determine where they're going to focus, what they're going to do, we just do a very open-ended assessment. What are your passions? Are there things that tug your heart? What are the existing connections? Sometimes just you look at the landscape and where you already have connections could be a place as well. And then, a survey might be in order. I'm sure, Juan Pablo, you guys would facilitate a survey to the field with a couple of church leaders to explore opportunities. So like if the church was saying, hey, we don't know exactly where we're going to focus. Might we visit a couple fields? Is that something FH would do?
Yes, absolutely, Matt. We're doing that with the prospects or churches that are approaching to us and don't have a clear idea where they can go. So we'll show them what is our world looking like in the countries that we are present, and just showing them, what are the opportunities there. Some churches really want to be focused on education, have a big number of teachers inside the church. So we may be ready for a field office or a country where we are more focused on the educational component of our model.
Right.
So those kind of coincidences or things that, well, I wouldn't call it coincidences, but rather just get giving and similar, same kind of things, similar things.
Yeah, I know ministry, they call these divine
There you go.
serendipities.
Correct.
And I think that, again, back to what I was saying, I think sometimes the church needs to pause and say, God, how have you gifted us? Who have you brought here? How can these assets and resources be applied to your global mission? And sometimes that works out that way. Like you mentioned, a church that had a high number of educators, and that was a definite need inside their community and field. So again, I think that's a great, to pause and really say, God, how have you gifted us? How have you equipped us to do ministry? This comes from Don Paul. He says, I just invested 2 weeks in Nairobi, Kenya on behalf of the church that I pastor in Omaha, Nebraska, and the organization I represent, the Josiah Foundation. Nairobi slums, with their inherent poverty, are overwhelming. Does FH work in these slums? How do they initiate relationships in such horrific environments? And how important is the man on ground in establishing such relationships? So are you working in Nairobi? How do you get started in a place that's so difficult? And are you looking for that man on ground connection? Are you contemplating the answer to that one, Pablo?
Yes. Can you please read the first part of the question? You asked about the work in Nairobi, but what was the second part of it? Please, ma'am.
Okay, so three layers to this question. One, he was just in Nairobi, Pastor Don Paul. He works with the church in Omaha, Nebraska. He's wondering, we'll do one at a time. Does FH work in Nairobi in the slums? That's one question.
Okay. No, we're not working in Nairobi.
Okay. Second question is, how do you engage in a place, how do you start a work in a place where the conditions are so horrific, just, incredible poverty?
Yeah, so the first we start by doing an evaluation, a lane, we call it a baseline, where where is the community at with education, with health, nutrition, and just those four basic sectors of our model. See where the community is at. Also, many times we have learned that we start by doing some relief work, as emergency responses, and that gives us like a initial door to start a long-term work there.
So there's an assessment of the community to try and use your four-pronged strategy, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And then the third question was the man on ground, the boots on ground guy. How important is that anchor person in a community to get started?
Okay, no, it's you mean the national staff, correct?
Yeah,
right. The meaning of the question. Okay, that's crucial because we work. Most of our staff is national. They're most of the time even people from the local communities, because it's important for a community to identify themselves with someone that understands the culture, that live in that environment as well, that understands what are the challenges. It's not that we're going there, stay 4 days in a hotel, go and to the villages or communities and say, you got to do this and do that, and then we'll leave to the city. Our staff has spent 20 days or probably more a month in the actual communities, eating the food the people in the community eat. It's like more like a counselor or advisor kind of person who's walking alongside with these families. Does that make sense?
Yes. So it's critical having those, whatever you want to call them, national workers, staff indigenous staff workers is absolutely critical. Yeah. One more question, and then after that I will wrap it up and again mention our upcoming event. But one final question. This is from Dennis. He says, a large percentage of our church already sponsors children through another organization. Is there another way to be involved through FH to impact a community that is not sponsorship centered? So could a church partner with FH but not necessarily through child sponsorship? Is there other ways?
Yes, absolutely. One of those ways could probably be sending short-term teams. As we have heard from Marvin, that's really impactful, not only for our communities but also for the church because of that relational piece. And also providing for special projects or special needs that we have, knowing that we're not only going to use those resources to build things, but to use those projects as vehicles to bring and restore those broken relationships.
So the answer is yes. There's short-term trips that FH will offer, and then could be special projects that could be sponsored. I'm going to make a comment here from one person. It's not a question. This comes from Richard, and he explains here that it's nice to know that after you've done a short-term trip, to an FHC2C, that there's people on ground that continue the work even after you leave. Again, I think that just reinforces the importance of presence of the relational aspect of what FH is all about here. So again, I want to thank Juan Pablo and Marvin for your time today. Thank you for sharing your heart, your experiences. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I apologize about the some of the technical glitches that we faced with some of the audio. I hope everything came through and you were able to understand the context, even though we lost Juan's voice a time or two. I want to once again just mention a few of the upcoming events that 1615 has. The Reduce Conference in Nashville, Tennessee, a one-day free conference about reducing the number of people groups sitting in darkness and the shadow of death. Again, kind of a twist here. We talk about expansion and growth, and those are all great kingdom principles, but we're focusing on reducing us to our proper size, that God would reduce us, but also how a focused vision, a reduced vision, can have incredible impact. We have another webinar, as I mentioned, October 22, addressing the importance of engaging internationals that God has brought to the United States. A lot of major cities, but no doubt some of the cities that you're in as well, not just the Minneapolises and Detroits and LAs. God is really doing something by bringing those folks here. So a great way to think about mobilizing your congregation to do cross-cultural ministry right in the context of the U.S. And lastly, we've got this September 11th webinar on how do we define missions. We have a conviction that language matters, definitions matter. And so this will really challenge you to think about how you define missions and really helping you to think if the definition that you have is a biblical one. So again, thank you for being with us today, Juan Pablo and Marvin. Thank you for all the attendees. I want to remind you that this webinar has been recorded, and it will be available at 1615.org within the next 2 weeks. Thank you again for sharing with us today some of your time. I'm Matthew Ellison for 1615. Thanks for being with us.